shifting gears slightly, actually quite a lot.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a lot, resetting to The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer. We were very lucky to get to go see it at the BFI IMAX with a Q&A with Jonathan Glazer. I think it was it Mark Oddy, who is his production designer and maybe his cinematographer. Forgive me for not. It was three of them up there talking about the film. Directs films very infrequently. I think it's been 10 years since his last film. He did Under the Skin, which I actually watched last night. It left me in quite a weird mood, but it was also striking and brilliant. Sexy Beast, which got a Paramount Plus show, which we got to see 2 episodes of the other day. Loosely adapted from a 2014 book by Martin Amis, which I've not read. I assume you've not read it either. The film is shot around the family of Rudolf Höss, who was an SS officer in 1943 and who was the longest-serving commandant of Auschwitz. And I think Jonathan Glazer very clearly said the film is shot around and involving Rudolf Höss. But he said very clearly, I'm not interested in making a story about the life of Rudolf Höss. It takes place around him and his family. It's not necessarily a biopic or a story about him. He was eventually executed in 1947 during the Nuremberg trials. And so this film is set adjacent to the atrocities of the Holocaust. Höss's family are situated in a fairly large domestic house whose back garden, lovingly attended to by his wife, played by Sandra Hüller, shares a wall with the Auschwitz camp. It's not a field over or a few places down the road. It literally, on one side, is a garden and a house and children playing in a pool and going about their days as a normal German family. And on the other side of that same wall is the unspeakable atrocities that took place at Auschwitz. It's shot with many characteristics of a documentary, and he talked a lot about this process of capturing this family in a certain way. There are very much shots that are capturing life as it happened. There's almost no camera movement. I say a couple of times the camera does move. It tracks the characters along the wall and sort of a long thing, but very much sort of on sticks, matter of fact, shot round the corner, seeing this family as they are. And from the very opening of the film, I think Jonathan Glazer very clearly wants to indicate to the audience that you need to use your ears, you need to listen. And the sound is one of the most important aspects of this film, where we start with film with a lot of blank vision on screen, silence originally, a title screen, the ramping up of the introduction of score and sound. It sort of immediately indicates, please listen. Listening is what is very important in this film. And we're never given a visual confirmation or a visual aid to the atrocities that you hear. You only see brief glimpses of trains bringing people into the camp over the horizon, a slight angle of the entrance, of one of the entrances, I assume, into the camp. Shots, and just a subtle indication of what might be happening. Like there's a shot of the family having dinner, and in the window is smoke rising from an incinerator. It's also set during a particular time in World War II. It's set in 1943, where if you know anything about Holocaust history, the Nazis were starting to ramp up Hitler's final solution. It was the ramping up of the full industrialized extermination of Jews in Europe on a mass scale. And the film sort of shows you some of the details of how that was discussed and how that carried itself out. George, we got to see a really interesting conversation. We got to see it on the biggest screen in the UK, which I actually found watching a film on a screen that big with subtitles was a little bit like playing
Flicking
visual tennis.
up and down.
My eye, obviously, this film's so visually arresting and it creates this very still watching experience. But I'm doing it. My eyes are sort of jumping up and down trying to catch the subtitles. But George, The Zone of Interest, very powerful film. How did you get on with it?
I'll begin by saying I think it's a really interesting piece of work. Yeah. I'm going to talk about it at length, but as a word, I would say it's just chilling. Bone chilling. Completely. And unfolds this quiet horror just on like the methodology of like Glazer's approach to the film, which I think is really interesting. You just touched on. It's like what's clever is that Auschwitz in the film is in a way what the Holocaust is in our consciousness today. Something that is both very immediate and also made peripheral. Yeah. And that's what we live in a time when it has never been more urgent, never been more relevant, and the scars of that period, still exist, and yet there are huge factions of society which deny its existence, downplay it, and seek to kind of alter the facts. And I think that's a really interesting sort of visual metaphor straight away. And Glazer spoke about being very aware of the kind of the way the world was changing when he was making the film. It took 10 years to make as well, because he makes things with incredible precision, and you can tell.
I quite appreciated, by the way, like hearing him discuss the film and witnessing his demeanor, the way he talks about his art, and seeing how he would have gone about making it, the time he takes, and obviously the process of which he made it as well.
And he refers to this whole construction of the film, like he said, there's the film you see and there's the film you hear, as you just talked about. And like you said, the film you see is all about Rudolf Höss, but the film you hear is the film he actually wanted to make. And the whole Rudolf Höss is this perpetrator perspective is a framing device through which you can capture the horrors of the Holocaust. And he used this term in the Q&A about the grotesque domesticity of the banal existence of Höss's family in that house right next to a death camp. And he talked about carefully constructing the environment to make it a period. They reconstructed Höss's house, but and they made everything inside it incredible 1943 period detail. And they minimized the presence as much as possible of cameras, and they didn't want the actors to feel like they were on a film shoot. They wanted the actors to feel like they are in almost like a theatre piece, a 360 1943 experience.
Talks about rolling camera for 45 minutes at a time, just trying to capture moments, and then from that he has constructed his film.
Exactly, and he talked. There was no lighting used in the entire film.
Yeah, which I thought was incredible.
And it almost
practical lights, but not sort of artificial.
And I don't think this is true, but it almost looks like it hasn't been color graded. It's like
very neutral. He's talked a lot about, I don't want the presence of my filmmaking to be known. I don't want any sort of style, any sort of effect to have been used.
So that's what brings me to my first point. Is that so? Glazer is when he spoke in the Q&A, it's clear that he's very, very cognizant of the dilemma and the problems filmmakers have when trying to capture something like the Holocaust on screen, right?
And saying something new about it as well, and not reiterating something someone else has said.
He's aware that the inherent apparatus of cinema can, if not careful, stylize, aestheticize, fetishize, empower its subject. So when you come to showing the unshowable and depicting the unthinkable, how do you do that in a way that is not distasteful? So, for example, Spielberg famously shot Schindler's List in black and white. Some people have said the black and white Schindler's List is almost too gorgeous. It's a deep black, and it's deep, but almost looks too nice. But, for example, Spielberg decided to shoot Schindler's List in black and white. Son of Saul, a few years ago, shot everything in a tight close-up, and everything. The horrors of Auschwitz were shot in peripheral and out of focus. And what Glazer has decided to do, and I think is very effective, is this perpetrator perspective, like I said, where everything is, you never see, as you said, Auschwitz, you just hear the horror. And I think the combination of those two things is incredibly effective, incredibly chilling, incredibly haunting. You mentioned Under the Skin. Glazer knows how to kind of do horror. I wouldn't describe Under the Skin necessarily as a horror film, but it's deeply uncomfortable and unsettling, and has imagery that is very difficult. And what I realized when watching The Zone of Interest is that he is a really interesting filmmaker, because he gives you the visual ingredients and he gives you the cinematic ingredients that you need to then make the film in your head and to go away. And there's a phrase that Paul Schrader, the writer, said once, which is that a good film starts when you leave the cinema. And that is exactly what you'll have when you see The Zone of Interest. You'll see it and you might find it confusing, confounding, because there are moments as well, talking about horror, of like deep surrealism and abstraction and violent use of sound. Yeah. But you come away and it will haunt your mind, and for the next 24 hours or longer, it will percolate, and you will have almost the film in your head. And that residue is what is the power of the film. So it's the cumulative effect of what he's doing. And it shows, because in the Q&A, as you talked about his conduct with the audience, he was saying, a lot of people try to sort of basically ask him what certain bits mean, because they're quite obscure. And he said, with certain elements, he was like, well, I don't need to explain myself because it's on screen. Everything I want to, the way I've expressed it is on screen. I can't express it in any other way. That's how I want to express it. It's on screen. And I don't want to say what it could mean, because I don't want to rob you as a viewer of your own interpretation of that and reduce what you've thought about it. And I think that's brilliant. And I think that is what The Zone of Interest is all about, is providing you with stimulating, provocative, unsettling imagery, unsettling cinema that you will come away and piece together and have this kind of haunting sense in your mind. That's what I think is great. I will just say there is a couple of moments. My only slight reservation is that I think there was a few times that I became very conscious of it as a formal exercise. This contrast, this juxtaposition between the domestic and the horrible. The horror. And there was just a few times I was like, I've got the juxtaposition, I've understood the horror, I've got what you're doing here and the formal contrast. What else have I got to go? What else have I got to explore within myself now? And what else have I been given apart from just seeing that this is a visual, that this is a formal contrast? So that's a minor thing. But other than that, I think it's a really, really kind of staggering, haunting piece of work that exists beyond the cinema screen.
There was an interesting question in our screening where someone talked about film being used in education to sort of tell, inform people about the Holocaust, and someone, praised. I think she praised the film for not being rated 18, and it makes this more accessible as an educational tool for the Holocaust. And I think, almost thinking about this as an educational film, it obviously does provide an insight to the Holocaust a certain way, but it doesn't, for me, sit, not as a criticism, I think what the film's trying to achieve, sit in that film, which is come and sit down and let me tell you about the Holocaust. I think there are many other films that are better at doing that. I think Schindler's List, for example, is better. The Pianist, even, of giving you a personal story and taking you through it. Like, a lot of the great Holocaust museums I've been to a great one in Washington, D.C., and the one in Jerusalem, Yad Vashem, is incredible. You're often given, I think in Washington, you're given one person and you can track their journey through the Holocaust in an entire museum, and then Yad Vashem is this architectural experience that tells you a story. I think the decision in this film to not really have protagonists as such, but to use Huss's family as a tool to frame a story, and as you said, leaving you with just your own feelings once you're done, is such a powerful decision that makes this film so effective.
I agree.
I think it's one of the most violent films I've ever heard.
But that's it, yeah.
And I think it was deeply unsettling from when it started all the way through to the very end of the credits. The credits forced me to be quiet and listen to them, which we were obviously going to stick around anyway for a Q&A, but the use of sound and the rising, I think the most intense part of the score is the crescendoing sound that happens in the credits. And if you know about what is going to happen next in history, that music and that following of darkness had a really deep, unsettling effect on me.
I will just say also on that point is that because a strange thing happened, because we were having the Q&A afterwards, the lights kind of came up, but everyone had to stay. And so typically in a cinema, that they would let the credits play out and people would kind of shuffle out quietly, but people kind of started to shuffle in their seats. And you and I, though, were I
couldn't quite speak to you yet. And I was still like trying to process this film, experiencing the end of the film, which is very vague, and specifically what he does with score, which I think is really, really clear. I totally understand what he's trying to do with the credits there. I find it deeply uncomfortable, deeply unsettling. Some of the most sickening shots for me were watching Sandra Hüller's character. I think she's just brilliant in this as well. She's really a top actress. Some of the most sickening shots were her showing her mother, who's come to visit them in this house, the garden, and just talking about, well, I'm hoping these can grow over, and this will be quite nice because it's come over here. And for her, it represents everything that her indoctrination would have told her is the perfect German life. A house in the countryside, father living very near to work, with children that have space to run and play. And it's just sickening to see this person move through the space. And I just found that really, really difficult if you know. And
there's a similarly, with the mother-in-law, there's a line when the mother-in-law comes to visit, and so it's Huss's mother-in-law, Sandra Hüller's mother, comes to visit, and she's sat in the kitchen, and she's just arrived. She's having a glass of wine or whatever, and she's like, "Oh, we had a terrible journey here. We got delayed at Krakow for an hour, and the train was so hot, and actually somebody fainted." And I was like, that is so uncomfortable, because you're talking about your benign transport experience from Krakow to Auschwitz, when we know the Jews were loaded on cattle trucks and it's ugh.
And even when she mentions I think some of the sounds and some of the terrible things that are happening, Sandra Hüller just goes, it's whatever. Like, she doesn't even want to engage with it. And like I said, visually, there's a cycle of sounds that happens in this film. There's visual, you see the steam of a train bringing people in. You then hear the sounds of people being rounded up and shot and despairing, and you hear the sounds of people banging on gas chambers. You hear the sounds of incinerator, and the cycle repeats itself.
I'm not sure that I didn't actually think that was the sound of people within the chamber. I think it was just the sound of the mechanization of the whole thing. But either way,
could be either.
But that's also what the film shows as well. Is it's the industrialization of death. Yeah. It's the mechanization of death, in which you have meetings between German high command about talking about something that is a logistical issue for them. They could easily be talking about parcel delivery or clothes production,
war munitions being sent around.
But it's like, oh no, we have this amount of product. Are
you ready to receive this many people in this period of time?
Yeah, incredibly chilling in that respect.
It's like the monster in this is you know, like you think about Amon Gert in Schindler's List, played by Ray Fiennes, probably one of the worst monsters ever portrayed in cinema. If you've seen that film, you know. But like, there is no monster in this film. I don't look at any individual character and think that was the atrocity. The atrocity is the complicity in it and the sort of the contrast between what is otherwise very domestic and benign.
And I think going back to the horror element, it's like the monster and the horror of the film haunts everything like a spectre. And Mika Levy does the score for this in the same way they did the score for Under the Skin. And I was thinking about the Zone of Interest, the music that they use in it, which isn't available yet because I wanted to go and find that horrific final track. But it just made me think that I think Mika Levy is up there with like one of my favorite contemporary composers for films. For films, was up there with Johnny Greenwood,
otherworldly
and Trent
sounds
Reznor
that you can't necessarily place.
And the sounds at the beginning, but particularly over that final credits, is this. It's indescribable, really, but it's this awful, growling, horrific, high-pitched choral element that is like grotesque but powerful, so powerful.
Captures the imagination.
And I think it's brilliant. And then, again, this haunting spectre throughout, and there's these also sort of strange growls. Do you know the growls
growling
that'll bubble up within scenes? You'll just suddenly hear like a drum.
You know. Usually, when we talk about films that are thematically completely different, we talk about like. Film is often we'll criticize a film for looking like it's made itself up as it's gone along and not quite had a clear vision of what it wanted to set out to make,
like Argyle,
or just like any of these films that feel like big studio films that never really stuck to the script. You think about these long 45-minute takes where I think he, in the best kind of way, didn't yet know what form this domestic visual element would look like. And he talks about filming this boy playing with his toys while the sound of people being executed is happening literally 50 meters away. And then there's this one really interesting scene where the boy goes and hears something, goes to the window and closes his window, but is he not quite old enough to understand what's happening, but knows that the sound is unpleasant.
Yeah, he flicks away and sort of he hears something that he really shouldn't, and then he flicks away in a way that's like a boy. Well, I thought it was like a boy hearing something that he shouldn't do, and not knowing what to do. I think the boy knows he's heard something horrific, but doesn't know what to do with it.
Doesn't quite understand.
Doesn't
not privy to the information. Just that format of finding something on the day that you shoot it. It really works for this. And it's very, very. I don't know what that sound is. I think they're testing the fire alarm, but anyway.
Yes, interesting.
But yes, the Zone of Interest, I think it gives us a top praise from us. Definitely go and see it. Please see it in the cinema.
Absolutely,
please.
Absolutely see it in the cinema.
If not for the visual and just for the fact that it's going to sort of take you out of the rest of the world. For the sound, I think it's so important to see.
I think actually the film is so carefully constructed. The sound design, everything, and as almost like a piece of theatre that you really have to, out of respect, I think, go see it. Go and see it in the cinema. Terrific. And we'd love to hear what people think of it as well.
Yeah.
The Zone of Interest. Please let us know your thoughts at hello@popkitchenpodcast.com. But definitely the best film we've spoken about this episode.
Yes. Yeah.